New pain at the pump. Gasoline inflation moves into the fast lane as supplies shrink and demand rises. The desperate search for a ship said to be carrying child slaves. Eye on America investigates a new and spreading drug craze with deadly side effects. And the crime galvanized the civil rights movement. After 4 decades, this man is finally going on trial.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Gasoline at $3 a gallon? Maybe. The meter that tallies the price of your gasoline purchase is spinning faster and faster. An Energy Department survey out today finds pump prices in just the past 3 weeks have risen 16 cents to a nationwide average $1.56 a gallon. Gasoline is highest in western states, averaging $1.69. As OPEC works to keep oil prices up, they edged ever closer today to $30 a barrel. And as OPEC holds down supply, U.S. motor fuel consumption has hit a record high. Pump prices could be heading for a record as well. CBS's Jim Axelrod is on the price watch.
Now the tax season is just about over, Americans are free to get really aggravated.
$1.59, $1.69. It's ridiculous. That's going up so high.
With production levels off from this time last year, there's roughly 6% less gasoline in stock. At the same time, peak driving season is almost here. Low supply, high demand. It doesn't take a PhD in economics to figure out what that could mean.
It's too expensive, man.
I would not be surprised at all to see gasoline at $2.50 a gallon. Some analysts are predicting $3 a gallon.
Hal Harvey, an efficiency expert with the Energy Foundation, says what's driving prices at the pump are the supply-draining vehicles we're driving to the pump.
Half of the cars sold in this country are now sport utility vehicles or pickups or minivans. And those get an average of about 20 miles per gallon compared to cars that get, say, 27 miles per gallon.
Well, I'd be surprised if it went up as high as $2.
But Ron Gold, who's with an oil industry-supported research group, is not so quick to embrace the gloom and doom. He points to last fall and forecasts for home heating oil price spikes. Heating oil was high, he says, but refiners heard the call and hiked supply.
If things go reasonably well, the same situation should prevail for gasoline. Mind you, it doesn't mean prices are coming down, but it does mean that a crisis should be avoided.
But in energy-challenged California, Harvey says trouble's coming, just not from the power source you'd expect.
I think gas prices are going to affect the average consumer more because they're going to be paying for it week in and week out. Electricity prices are going to be a real headache for that 1 or 2 hours that you get shut off this summer, but for most people it won't be more than 1 or 2 hours.
In fact, right now, California's got the highest average price for a gallon of unleaded regular, $1.83. With all the talk of what could happen, keep in mind that's a long way from the record price, an inflation-adjusted $2.56 a gallon set in the summer of 1980. Dan?
Jim Axelrod, thanks. In one of the main energy-producing regions of the world, the Middle East, there was a new surge of violence today. Israeli helicopters and tanks fired on Palestinian targets in Gaza late in the day. The attacks were retaliation for Palestinians' shelling of Israeli towns just across the border from Gaza. But as CBS's David Hawkins reports, the most serious attacks came earlier when Israeli fighters bombed a Syrian position in Lebanon for the first time in 5 years.
Israel's airstrike on a Syrian radar station in Lebanon is raising fears of a dangerous military escalation in the region. Syria has put its 35,000 troops in Lebanon on high alert. Its foreign minister accused Israel of trying to kill the peace process and delivered a warning.
Israel has made a blunder and a mistake in attacking a Syrian post in Lebanon. It will pay a heavy price for that at the convenient and appropriate time.
Israel says the bombing was retaliation for a cross-border missile attack Saturday by Syrian-backed Hezbollah guerrillas that killed one Israeli soldier.
This is unacceptable, and Israel will do what is necessary to defend its soldiers.
Israel accuses Syria of doing nothing to stop Hezbollah attacks on Israeli positions along its border with Lebanon. The United States called for both sides to show restraint, but placed the blame squarely on the Hezbollah.
We condemn this escalation of the cycle of violence that was initiated by Hezbollah in a clear provocation designed to escalate an already tense situation.
Regardless of who started it, Israel's airstrikes have thrown cold water on attempts to restart peace talks. They also risk turning what's so far been a low-intensity conflict with the Palestinians into a wider war. David Hawkins, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
U.S. and Chinese negotiators will meet in Beijing this Wednesday, and U.S. officials said today the Americans will press for the return of the Navy reconnaissance plane that collided with the Chinese fighter jet April 1st. As CBS News national security correspondent David Martin reports, the U.S. team will bring along some visual aids.
U.S. officials plan to take this video of an earlier close encounter with the now dead Chinese fighter pilot to their meeting Wednesday in Beijing.
That's too close. I agree. No problem. He's very, very close. Oh, yes.
It is the same pilot the U.S. says caused the collision. And Pentagon officials believe China's leaders may not realize just how close their pilots were coming. Last December, when the U.S. protested the close encounters, the Chinese responded that their planes were coming no closer than 1,000 feet. Now the U.S. can say, "I told you so," and produce the pictures to prove it. In China, the dead pilot is being honored as a martyr. The U.S. sees him as the primary culprit in harassing American reconnaissance flights.
First thing I thought was, this guy just killed us.
Navy pilot Shane Osborne denies China's claim he suddenly swerved into the Chinese jet. The only swerving he did was after the Chinese aircraft hit his propeller.
The sharp left turn they're talking about is when the aircraft went out of control after the number one prop was impacted in the nose.
The U.S. has no objection to Chinese jets intercepting reconnaissance flights as long as they keep their distance. The U.S. will continue the flights, although none are scheduled before Wednesday's meeting.
We look to the Chinese to address these issues with us in a straight manner, not in an accusatory manner, not in a shrill manner.
As for the Navy plane, the U.S. wants it back and says it never should have been boarded by the Chinese, who continue to crawl all over it. The Navy wants to send in a team of engineers to see if it can be repaired and to see what's left of its sophisticated eavesdropping gear. The U.S. may have the pictures to prove Chinese pilots were coming too close, but the Chinese still have the plane and the equipment that proves the U.S. was spying. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
There is an intensive search underway tonight for an African ship believed to be carrying hundreds of children being sold into slavery. It left port in Benin almost 2 weeks ago and was turned away by at least 2 neighboring countries. As CBS's Mark Phillips reports, the ship saga has exposed a disturbingly common practice in West Africa.
In the West African country of Benin, a chalkboard lists the ships expected to arrive. But port officials have been frantically trying to find one ship that is still missing, raising fears for the fate of its passengers and raising the curtain on a dirty little secret, the illicit trade in child slaves. The children, often 10 or 11 years old, are from no-hope, dirt-poor villages, sold into a life of domestic servitude in neighboring countries, or shipped off to work 12-hour days on West African cocoa plantations. By any definition, it's slavery.
If you take a child, you don't pay them any money at all, make them work all those long hours, and don't allow them to go to their homes, that is slavery.
Often the work involves physical abuse and beatings. For the girls, it sometimes ends in prostitution. In the case of the missing ship, with an estimated 180 children on board, there's an even greater fear.
One doesn't want to contemplate an idea where some of the kids, maybe who were sick, might have been dropped into the ocean. But the problem is it could happen because those kids don't have names to them. They don't have identity.
There are unconfirmed reports that the slave ship has been spotted off the African coast, the fate of its human cargo unknown. For centuries, when millions were shipped in chains from here to the Americas, this part of Africa was known as the Slave Coast. Now it is again. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
The all-night curfew imposed after the racial unrest in Cincinnati is over. Officials also promised serious reform today to help bridge the city's racial divisions in the wake of the police shooting and killing of an unarmed African-American suspect. In all, more than 800 people were arrested in the protests and violence after the shooting and for curfew violations. In Alabama today, there were echoes of a tragic turning point in America's civil rights struggle almost 40 years after the fact. It was the hate bombing of a Birmingham church in 1963 that killed 4 African-American girls. CBS's Mark Strassman reports on the man just now going on trial for the crime and a legacy of pain.
And you could actually feel the building shake.
For Carolyn McKinstry, today's start of the bombing trial brings back awful memories. In 1963, she was 14, the same age as some friends she had left 2 minutes earlier in a church dressing room.
I stepped out into the sanctuary and the bomb exploded.
That explosion at the 16th Street Baptist Church shocked even Birmingham, then a bitterly segregated city at war with itself. 4 girls primping for Sunday school were killed.
I think I was just numb for a long period of time meaning about 10 years.
Today, jury selection began for Thomas Blanton, now 62, one of the original suspects in the bombing murders. In 1963, Blanton belonged to a group of rogue Klansmen prosecutors say were responsible. Only one of them was ever convicted, back in 1977.
The case against Blanton is largely unchanged since the 60s. It relies on circumstantial evidence and self-incriminating statements. And there's pressure on this trial from outside the courtroom for justice long overdue.
The history of this city, the eyes of the world looking down on it, I mean, that's all going to come into play.
And like Carolyn McKinstry, many here resent the decades of delay.
You tell me, if it were one of your daughters, you know, it's 38 years later, too late. I don't think it's ever too late to do the right thing.
Simmering resentments live on in this community, eager now, finally, to close a dark chapter in its history. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Birmingham.
The federal law that orders anti-abortion protesters to stay away from abortion clinic entrances has survived the latest legal challenge. The U.S. Supreme Court today rejected without comment the latest appeal by anti-abortion groups. Also today, the justices agreed to hear a case that could affect many companies and millions of workers. The issue, whether and if so how, anti-discrimination laws protecting the disabled apply to workers with repetitive motion injuries. Next on tonight's CBS Evening News, Eye on America. The drug abuse problem you probably haven't heard about. It's a killer and it is spreading. On the CBS Weather Watch, it's mud, flood, and now a topping of mid-April snow in parts of the upper Midwest. More sandbag levees went up along swollen rivers even as the snow fell. Hopes rose for some residents in the upper Midwest Red River Valley, where the waters may now be receding at least a little. Flood warnings are still up in the region along the Mississippi River. Some bridges were closed and Amtrak rail service was disrupted. In America's uphill battle against a flood of narcotics, there's a growing trail of death, addiction, and rising crime from a powerful prescription painkiller. At least 120 abusers have died nationwide, but most of them in places you'd hardly suspect. CBS's Cynthia Bowers went to the front lines for tonight's Eye on America.
Lee County is miles off the beaten path, a corner of Virginia wedged between Tennessee and Kentucky, a snapshot of Appalachia. But now that picture is clouded by a drug that has injected itself into every aspect of life here.
Is these pills, I mean, they're killing our people in our county and our communities.
Major Jimmy Woodard has seen plenty of drug abuse, but he's never seen anything take hold like OxyContin.
It's worse than any disease that I could think of, cancer, AIDS. I mean, it's just like an epidemic.
Robberies are up 90%. 5 deaths in this sparsely populated county have been linked to the drug in the last 6 months. And despite reports of an overdose every other day, nothing is slowing the abuse of the synthetic morphine. 1/3 of high school juniors, 1 in 10 7th graders say they have at least tried what they call oxys.
Where were these pills coming from?
They're everywhere. And the people you never would imagine that does them.
Recovering addict Todd Williams says whether from dealers or doctors, it was alarmingly easy to get his hands on what is supposed to be a tightly controlled narcotic.
It's a big game. When there's people younger than me, they can go to the doctor and say their knees are messed up or their back's messed up and get oxys and there's something bad wrong there.
But the epidemic of abuse that started in rural communities like this one seems to be spreading. At such an alarming rate, the drug's maker finds itself in the unprecedented position of trying to justify a pill many say is just too potent.
This is a drug that's an angel of death or an angel of life, depending on how it's used.
Virginia's Attorney General, along with those in a growing number of states, says the manufacturer has an obligation to help stem the abuse.
It does have an abuse potential. We've known that for years. We've been very actively educating physicians and other healthcare practitioners on appropriate selection criteria to get the right drug to the right patients.
Purdue Pharma reportedly spent $26 million last year educating doctors as to the wonders of OxyContin. It now outsells Viagra, but Art Van Zee, who's practiced medicine here 25 years, believes the drug was over-promoted and is now being overprescribed.
They have very heavily marketed to the extent that no other narcotic's ever been marketed.
Purdue Pharma says it's just getting the word out about a breakthrough medication, that abuse is the problem, not the drug. But in places like Lee County, it's become increasingly hard to separate the promise from the pain. In Pennington Gap, Virginia, I'm Cynthia Bowers for Eye on America.
In the growing list of potential medical risks and benefits for women taking estrogen, there's a possible new entry tonight in the benefits column. A new international study suggests that estrogen in birth control pills may help protect women against colon cancer. A Bosnian Serb has been jailed in the Netherlands on war crimes charges. The man is a local Serb commander. He is charged with taking part in a massacre of thousands of Muslims 6 years ago. He was captured in Bosnia over the weekend. That massacre took place with deadly efficiency, lasting just days. But as CBS's Alan Pizzi reports, it's taking years to reveal the truth of what happened.
In a small clinic in Bosnia, a lonely woman gives blood, not to save a life, but to find the dead. As many as 10,000 men and boys disappeared after Bosnian Serb forces overran the Muslim enclave of Srebrenica in 1995 and were never seen alive again. Nura Mustafić's husband, 3 sons and a brother may be among the more than 4,000 still unidentified victims of the massacre stacked in this special warehouse. In a unique project, DNA from the grieving is being matched with that taken from the bodies.
For each body, we will take a sample like this.
The bodies were found in mass graves, often having been reburied to hide evidence. And until the DNA project began with US and Dutch government funding, it was almost impossible to identify them.
Srebrenica, this building and the 4,000 body bags is a special case and the most difficult identification problem that we face in Bosnia.
And that's saying something. The entrance to an ancient salt mine holds more than 300 bodies from another massacre in anonymous cold storage. Each of these files is a missing person case. Only 232 are marked identified. Solving the puzzle requires building a computerized database that will eventually hold DNA information from 75,000 blood and 20,000 bone samples.
DNA is not magic science. You had to have a bone, exhumed bone from the body, and you had to have the blood related with that bone.
So deep are the wounds of war here, so ingrained are ethnic hatred and suspicion, that barcodes must be used to ensure complete secrecy for the samples. If that seems excessive, try to imagine how they find closure in Bosnia. Personal effects from exhumed bodies are washed, then photographed in hopes relatives can identify them.
More than 2,000 people have looked at the book, and we now have 23 presumptive identifications based on showing of this book.
Bosnia still holds war secrets, mass graves, even hillsides where bodies are yet to be found. Experts say it will be at least another 7 years before they've done all they can do, and even then, the whole truth won't be known. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Srebrenica.
A South Korean took top honors in the Boston Marathon today, snapping a 10-year winning streak by Kenya. Li Bongzhu was first to cross the finish line with a time of 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 43 seconds. But Kenya did not get shut out. Catherine Diriba won the women's race for the second year in a row. If you're waiting to the last minute to file your federal income tax return, your wait is just about over. It must be postmarked in most cases by midnight tonight. The IRS expects to receive about 130 million returns this year. At last count, 77 million had been filed, so if you're a late filer, you're not alone. The average refund so far, $1,740. The most common error, an incorrect or missing Social Security number. More than 1.5 million people made that mistake last year. Oh, and don't forget the proper postage or your return will be returned. We will return tomorrow with another edition of the CBS Evening News. We invite you to join us. Dan Rather reporting from New York. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
Does a popular herb really help cure depression? Tomorrow, experience CBS News.